Good morning. The recent two-day visit of the Russian President Vladimir Putin to China at the beginning of his fifth term in office was an important event and extensively covered by the global media. According to the reports, the two leaders discussed Ukraine, West Asia, American hegemony, and how to strengthen the bilateral ties. One of the key things which would certainly have been on the table and discussed extensively by the two leaders has not found mention in the news, and that is what I wish to talk about in my video today. Now, as member nations, China and Russia, they have a roadmap to bring stability by 2030 through prosperity and development for the global South nations. Now, global South nations are in the Eurasian landmass and the African continent. They constitute 125 countries of the total 193 nations in the world today, which is 80% of the world population is global South. Global South is what used to be called the third world countries during the Cold War, the countries which were less developed, underdeveloped, or developing nations. Now, as member countries, China and Russia, they have identified 4 initiatives which have been enunciated by Xi Jinping and endorsed by Putin to take this stability of the global South forward. And these initiatives are Global Development Initiative, which is about taking the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals forward, where China has a major role to play because Chinese own 15 Sustainable Development Goals are aligned with the goals of the United Nations. Second is the Global Security Initiative. This is about providing equal and indivisible security to the member nations, which should not be a zero-sum game. The third initiative is the Global Civilizational Initiative, which is about showing respect and sensitivity to the member states' civilization, tradition, customs, form of government, and most of all, core concerns. And the fourth initiative is Global Artificial Intelligence Initiative. Now, this is about the artificial industries and the industries based on emerging technologies where China is a world leader. And therefore, China will set the standards. Now, when these industries will go to the nations of global South, then it is those nations which will decide the protocols, the procedures, the rules and the norms, everything will be decided by the member country. Now, with these 4 initiatives, 2024 happens to be a very important year to take this forward towards stability of 80% of the world population. Why? Because in 2024, this year, the presidency of BRICS is with Russia, and President Putin has an extensive plan of what to do in his presidency. I will just talk about that in a while. And the second reason is, interestingly, towards the second half of this year, the SCO presidency will pass on to China. And China, as we know, has marked 2030 as a very important year. Why? Because in July of 2017, the Chinese disclosed their document called New Generation Artificial Intelligence Development Plan, according to which China hoped, if not to dominate, but to lead the world in industries of artificial intelligence. And the second document we know was announced in 2014, which is called Made in China, that by 2030 it was to be accomplished. And if reports are to be believed, about 70% of what they had set out to achieve, they have already achieved. And 2030 is important for Russia as well, because the present presidency, the 5th term of Putin, it finishes in 2030. So this is the time that they are looking, the two leaders are looking at for bringing stability in the world. Now, before I go further to discuss what all issues are there is a requirement or there is a necessity to understand the so-called multipolar world today, what exactly it is. So, the world that we are living in today, there are three great powers first of all. They are America, China and Russia. And a great power is one which has the capability, capacity and the political will to influence events way beyond their geographical border, which is only possible if they follow an independent or a non-aligned foreign policy, which is what these three nations do. Having said this, that there are three great powers, in the world of today, something very different, very distinctive, which has never happened in the world history is being seen. And that is that there are two groups which have entirely different thinking, diametrically opposite thinking. And these two groups are, one is led by America. And this group believes in balance of power. And Americans are the past master at balance of power because this is what they exercised during the Cold War. Once the Cold War ended and it became a unipolar world, then the balance of power was not required, but they still believe that balance of power has a relevance in the world of today, which is why the American analysts repeatedly keep talking of a second Cold War, the present situation, which of course it is not. We will just talk about it in a while. So, this balance of power is basically predicated, it is pivoted on their strength, which is military power. So, what the Americans have done is that for Indo-Pacific region, which is our region, we know the global geopolitics has shifted to our region for two reasons. One is the rise of China and second is the rise of the global South nation, because most of the fastest growing economies of the world are in this region. So because of this region, now they want to exercise balance of power in this region through a military strategy which is called integrated deterrence. Now, integrated deterrence, to accomplish that, they have created alliances, they have created blocks like Quad, Squad, AUKUS 1, AUKUS 2, NATO, which is 30 nations, has been expanded to 32 nations, and now they want to bring NATO from Atlantic to the Pacific as well. So this is what they want to do. Now, on the other side, the thinking is based on cooperation, globalization and partnership, because it is about development and prosperity, and this is the global South nation which is supported by two great powers, China and Russia. So it is an entirely different thinking. It is about globalization. Whereas the thinking of the American side, which is 20% of the population, and that is the G7 and the global North nations, which are the developed nations of the world. In other words, during the Cold War, what used to be the first world and the second world countries, 20% of the population, they are the ones which are aligned with America in the balance of power thinking. So whereas the global South nations, they talk of globalization, the Americans talk of deglobalization, they talk of de-risking. So this block basically is creating the imbalance and the instability in the world today. Now, the whole idea is that once they have this, they have the military blocks and they have this integrated deterrence. So now they have a rule-based order. And who has created the rules? The Americans have created the rules. The rules have never been spelled out, but they are enforced by the Americans and their allies, which are in a military alliance, all of them. On the other side, what the global South nations, China and Russia, they say that everything should be based on international law. That means United Nations based international law. They give centrality to the United Nations. So as I said, this bloc, which is led by the balance of power bloc, it is about competition. It is not about cooperation. So when we talk of competition, the biggest competition is happening in the technologies, in the emerging technologies and artificial intelligence. So this is where the Americans, they first spoke about, because they feel that their biggest competition in this century is with China. They came up with this phrase called small yard high fence, that certain key technologies need to be denied to China because they don't want to compete with China. They basically want to constrain China. Now what they have done is that small yard has been expanded into a larger yard. More and more emerging technologies, green technologies have been added, things like electric vehicles, things like solar panels, where the Americans and the Europeans, they are levying very high tariffs on the Chinese electric vehicles and the other things. So this is what I said, 20% of the population, but still it has about 48% of the global GDP. On the other side, you have 80% of the population still with 48% of the GDP, global GDP. But their GDP is rising. And the reason it is rising is because, as I said, in global South nation, there are the fastest growing economies are here. For example, the African continent, which comprises of 55 nations, their 11 economies are the fastest growing economy of the first, 11 of the 13 in the world are the fastest growing economies, and they are all from Africa. So here is my bottom line on this, the multipolar world. In this world, China and Russia, they are looking for stability of the world, at least 80% of the world till 2030. Whereas what we will see until 2030 is lot of turbulence, lot of imbalances, whether it concerns trade, whether it concerns use of military power, from this 20% which believes in balance of power. We have seen this in Ukraine, we are seeing this, we have seen in Ukraine, we have seen in West Asia, and similarly we will be seeing more of this in West Pacific. For example, the Taiwan Strait and then the South China Sea. Just as the Americans have used Ukrainians against Russians, the frontline states for the Americans will be Philippines in the South China Sea and Taiwan for the Chinese in the Taiwan Strait. So this is the world that we are looking at, a very unique sort of a thing which is unfolding. But a lot of stability will come by 2030, primarily because of the 80% of that population and the fact that the two great powers in this group, which is China and Russia, they are building up deterrence against the American military power. And they are working very fast on building up deterrence against them. And as far as the other countries of global South are concerned, they want to give them the global security initiative that I spoke about. Now, one of the key things that a lot of American analysts, because this is a thinking again of the Cold War, they keep talking is that Americans have made a mistake. They should have ensured that China and Russia, two great powers, should not have come together in a said or an unsaid military alliance. Now, on both counts, they are wrong. First of all, China and Russia, they are not in a military alliance, because when there are two great powers involved, they can take care of their own security, their own defense. They need not get into an alliance. They have a strategic partnership, and that is the way it will remain, irrespective of how deep their interaction becomes, even in the military field. And the second point is, it has nothing to do with America. These two countries, the two great powers, China and Russia, they have come together since decades because the vision, especially when Xi Jinping came to power in November 12, he realized that his vision that he had for the world and for China, it aligned with the vision of President Putin for Russia and the world. So what Xi did was that beginning of 2013, he traveled to Moscow and he met up with President Putin. And the two leaders, they exchanged their vision. Putin's vision was about Eurasian Economic Union, that how to bring connectivity and prosperity in the countries which belong to Central and North Asia and Eastern Europe. And of course, now his vision has expanded from Eurasian Economic Union to Greater Eurasia. As far as Xi Jinping is concerned, his vision again of development and prosperity for the Chinese and for the world was through Belt and Road Initiative, which now has entered in phase 2. Phase 1 was about physical infrastructure. Phase 2 is about digital Silk Road, which is the hardware and software cyberspace connectivity, which is about data centers, e-commerce, broadband networks, smart cities, and industrial internet. And for the industrial internet, which is about use of artificial intelligence in industry to increase the productivity of those industries, they are experimenting, the Chinese are experimenting that in their Greater Bay Area, which is a group of 11 cities, including Macau and Hong Kong. So as they progress in this, then all these industries, they will eventually come to help or to develop the global South nations. And considering that the two leaders, Putin and Xi, in the last 10 years, they have met 40 times. It speaks a lot that they have had a lot of opportunity to align, to further, to refine their visions, to see how they can do it better, both for their own people and for the world. So this is what they have been doing, and it has nothing to do with the Americans pushing the Chinese and the Russians together because of the Ukraine war. It could have a little effect, but the main thing is their underlying vision. A vision which the Americans lack. Now, let's talk of his visit per se, Putin's visit to China. There it was disclosed that in 2023, the bilateral trade came to $240 billion, and 90% of this trade was done in yuan ruble, which says a lot. Which means that as the leaders of, not leaders really, because Global South is not about leadership. In fact, let me digress to make a point here. During G20, which was held in India by the Modi government, the External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar has repeatedly said that we are the voice or the leader of the Global South. Well, Global South doesn't need a voice of India. Global South is not about leadership, somebody becoming a leader. Have we ever heard the Chinese say that we are the vision, we are the voice or the leaders of Global South? No. So that is all projection, nothing else what Jai Shankar was doing. But to come back to what I was talking, so now the whole idea is, and this is what will be dwelled upon this year by Putin, this is one of his priorities, to see de-dollarization. Not really to replace the dollar as the world currency, because dollar, as far as Global South nations are concerned, they have realized, especially during the Ukraine war, as to how arbitrarily the sanctions have been put on the Russians, and the Russians were sought to be isolated. Well, that has not happened because it has not, the Russians, the Global South nations are sufficiently on the side of the Russians. So the whole idea is how to not replace the dollar, but to displace the dollar. And that is to be done by local trade. It is to be done by buying gold. In fact, a lot of US Treasury bonds, they are being sold. And US today already has a national debt of $34 trillion, which means the inflation will go up in US. For how long can they keep printing the notes, the dollars? And then all these nations are looking at, the BRICS nations, they are looking at cryptocurrency backed by blockchain, and more important, the digital currency, which is supported by the central banks and backed and helped by blockchain. This is what they are looking at as an alternative route to keep the dollar out, to keep the SWIFT out. So all these things are happening, and we will have big announcements on this when the summit is held towards the end of the year in Russia. And the other four things that the two leaders discussed, and which is there in the reports, is one, they want to strengthen the energy sector. Now we know that Russia is a major exporter of energy and China is a major importer of energy. So all the pipelines, gas pipelines that used to go to Europe, now from Siberia and elsewhere, they're all come down to China. That is the plan. And then the far east of Russia is to be developed, which will mean a lot for Russia in the world. Then, as far as connectivity is concerned, the second point, the whole idea is that both sides have agreed. They have in fact made a joint commission to look into how to have the Northern Sea route available round the year. Northern Sea route will be a big thing, very big thing, which will connect Europe to Asia. And here is where we will see a lot of tensions in the Arctic region between the global north and the global south. And for that, the third thing comes in, which is more intense defense interaction between China and Russia, where the two sides said that they will have more joint exercises and they will have more air and naval patrols. Now, patrols are about combat. Exercises is an entirely different thing. So that is what they are looking at. Next, in science and technology, a lot of interaction will happen, and both the sides, they bring a lot of strengths on the table. From the Russian side, they are good in aerospace, they are very good in metallurgy, they are good in machinery, they are good in petrochemicals. And on the Chinese side, we know their strengths are supercomputers, robots, 6G technology where they are working. 5G is already gone to Russia, and now both these partners, they will work together on 6G, and they will then look at strengthening the supply chains. So the bottom line, or the big thing to say, is this, that we will see a lot of stability in 80% of the world, the global south. But we will see a lot of turbulence and lot of instability in that 20% of the world which is governed or which agrees with the balance of power thinking, and this is the way the world will move towards 2030. And I must say here, although this calls for a separate video, that India under the Modi government is on the wrong side of history. Thank you very much.